Good morning, Lisa Lynett here, and today I was just going to talk to you guys a little bit about hummingbirds for the most part. We've seen a ton of hummingbirds this year, so I was just going to go over sort of what plants they like and prefer versus some of the plants that you might not attract them to your garden with. So the big one this year is this Kufia. It's Kufia ignea. It's Mexican flower, no, cigar flower or Mexican something. I can't remember the other part of the Mexican part, but typically what you hear about hummingbirds is they like red and they like tubular flowers. So this almost fits the bill for the perfect flower for them. It's not red, it's orange, but it has a really nice long tube, which is almost the length of their beak. And so they have been darting around this bed since this plant started flowering, which it's been going probably since June. Before that, we started to see them on the Nepeta Walker's Low, which I covered last week. It's a catmint, and it starts blooming early May and tops out about this big. It is not red, it is not orange, it is bluish purple. And so they really don't care about the color of the flower. They really are looking for that tubular flower. So if it has any sort of length to the flower where they can get their beak in there, that's what they go for. So I just brought a couple examples of other plants that were growing around the club. Last year I grew this on number 15 tee box, and I had it around the GLC in that bed. This year I'm growing it at the front entrance sign. This is Penstemon arabesque, and this is the flower for the hummingbirds. Obviously it's red and tubular, so they love this one. Just took cuttings of this the other day. Not sure where it's going to show up next year, but it'll definitely be somewhere on the course because the hummingbirds like it. So that's Penstemon arabesque. It is an annual. Kufia is an annual as well, so these are both plants that you have to plant year after year. Nepeta is the perennial that comes back year after year. Another tubular flower that we're growing on the course that the hummingbirds seem to like is Ruellia. This is sort of a funky plant. It is really slow to get started, and it's not a prolific bloomer, but it's sort of cool. It's got the purple color to it. It's tubular, they like it, and it gets quite large. It'll top out probably about 3 feet, 3.5 feet when it's done for the season. And it's really cool. It's got this sort of brown to maroon stem on it, which pairs really well with the ornamental grasses that we're growing here on the club. So that's Ruellia, and that too is an annual. So that's another one you have to plant year after year. And then I sort of brought a stumper for us. Like, which one of these flowers do you think the hummingbirds would go for, based on its flower structure? Because I think people think that hummingbirds will only go for these big tubular flowers, and that's not true. I've seen hummingbirds on zinnias. The hummingbirds love Tithonia, which this really looks like a zinnia, and that's why I brought it up here. I didn't have a good example of a zinnia. And this is a marigold. Hummingbirds will not go for the marigold. See how there's so many petals? You don't have an actual single structure for the hummingbird to put its beak down into to get the nectar. So marigolds, no go for the hummingbirds. But on this guy, and I don't know if you can see it up close, there's all these little tiny yellow flower structures coming up out of the center of the Tithonia, and that is what the hummingbirds go for. They will stick their beak down into that little tiny, it's actually the female part of the flower, the ovary, where the nectar sits, and it will stick its beak down in there on zinnias and Tithonia. So they like those as well. So that's sort of what we've got right off the top of my head growing close to the clubhouse. Out on the course, again, we covered salvias last week, the blue salvia Victoria, which is growing along the clubhouse and up in the circle bed. They don't particularly go for that one. The flower structure is really small on that one, and I don't see them on that a lot. But the bigger salvias they go for, we're growing a white salvia, down on the fence along 9 here, and then on 12 tee box we're growing sort of a pinky peachy salvia called Coral Nymph, which they go for. Again, that flower on those guys is longer like this, so that's where we see the hummingbirds. I think we'll walk over and take a look at the Asclepias, and I'll show you all the butterflies we got going on over there. So we have noticed a ton of butterflies this year and bees on the flowers, and in part that really has to do with the butterflies, especially has to do with the butterfly weed, go figure. Asclepias, and this is an annual Asclepias, this tall orange and yellow plant. There goes a butterfly right now, and there's a bee flying around. The butterflies love butterfly weed. So I have seen a bunch of monarch caterpillars hanging off these guys, and they're starting to come out of their chrysalises now and fly away. We see a lot. What you're seeing here now is like painted ladies. So that butterfly enjoys the Asclepias as well. And they're sort of like a hummingbird in the sense that they have that long proboscis, and that's how they get the nectar out of the flowers. And so they enjoy the tubular flowers as well, because they keep that thing all rolled up. I don't know if you've ever looked at a butterfly up close, but it's really cool. It's called a proboscis, and it's rolled up, and then when they land on a flower, it unrolls and goes in and gets the nectar. So they like to stick that down into the tubular flowers as well. So another plant that we've noticed the bees especially on this year is around the corner here, and we'll go look at that. This is Calamintha nepetoides, subspecies nepeta. Some people, or some nurseries, you'll find it just Calamintha nepeta. Calamint is its common name, and it is a great plant, not only because it draws all the pollinators in. We've seen honeybees, bumblebees, hornets, wasps, and I know some people do not like the bugs, and I would just say that if you leave them alone, they're really not interested in you. So, you know, if you're a little sketchy about walking by them and thinking they're going to get you, just walk by. They're not going to bother you. They're more interested in getting their nectar. So this is a great plant. It can handle full sun, and I'm actually growing it in part shade in other places on the course, and it actually, for me, I think it looks a little bit better in part shade versus the full sun. It tends to wash out a little bit in full sun. And it's been blooming. I would say it started blooming maybe end of June, beginning of July, and it's just been going. And it'll go right through fall when we cut stuff back. The other cool thing about this plant is if you're daring enough to brave the bees and the wasps and the bumblebees, it smells spectacular. It's a mint. It smells like peppermint or mentholyptus. It smells really, really good. So we like that plant. We're using it all over on the course for the bees and also for its long bloom time. So that's it. That's what we're going to cover today. Thanks for joining me.